I said I'm not afraid anymore! Do you hear me? I'm not afraid anymore!
A little while back now, I took a look at a few horror moments in otherwise non-horror games. Times the developers thought they'd try to be sneaky and scare us when we least expected it. Well, seeing as the years stop coming and they don't stop coming and they don't stop coming, I thought it'd be fun to go back and take a look at a few more examples. Especially considering a lot of people blew up my comments section with ideas for other titles to check out. Again too, keep in mind that this isn't supposed to be any kind of definitive list. So if there's anything missing here, don't take it as a personal insult. Also too, I'm really aiming for that 1,000,000 sub mark this year, so if you could hit that subscribe button, that'd be awesome as well. Sound good? Alright, let's get into it.
Move it! Go, go, go!
Now, Bethesda have always been pretty good at finding ways to throw little horror sequences into their games, with the Dunwich building in Fallout 3 being a great example. But even before that, they were pulling the same kind of thing with Elder Scrolls Oblivion.
It's more like a nightmare.
I know the part of the sewers you were talking about. Follow me, I'll show you.
And while you could argue that a fair few sections leaned into horror, one of the more memorable sequences was one of the shrine missions for the Daedric Lord Vermina. Right, so long story short, a wizard stole a orb, unintentionally locking himself inside this dreamlike prison, which has now manifested itself within this tower. And now you've got to head in there, navigate through this place and try to find it. If you ever played Constantine's Mansion and Thief the Dark Project, well, then this stuff is all going to seem very familiar. With it looking like a fairly innocuous place from the outside, only to slowly reveal itself as this surreal and nightmarish world. You got rooms that are upside down with the furniture on the ceiling. Other times the furniture is twice the size it's supposed to be. And then you got rotting corpses and pools of blood also being common decorative pieces throughout. One section of the tower is called the Oasis, which is just a crumbling tower in the middle of this endless sea of lava. And then another room is a series of walkways suspended in this black void, like we just suddenly crossed over into Max Payne's nightmares. Easily the most unsettling room though is another one in a black void where there's nothing but dead bodies hanging from ropes in all directions. And the audio alone in this room is unsettling enough, never mind the visuals.
That's rad.
Along with this, you're also constantly being attacked by tough creatures, reminding us of Oblivion's most terrifying element, its horribly scaled difficulty slider.
Oh, fuck.
The final room of the tower is where you finally come across the wizard himself, lost in this perpetual spell-induced sleep limbo. And in a really cool attention to detail in the room just before this, you can even hear what sounds like the guy snoring. Either way though, once you grab that orb, you can leave this place for good and hopefully never return. Your reward for all of this is a unique staff which has the ability to clone NPCs, creating a hostile double that instantly starts going after the person they're cloned from.
This is the part where you fall down and bleed to death.
So yeah, easily one of the more unique items from easily one of the most unique quests in the entire game. Now, I'll admit that I've never been a huge fan of the earlier Hitman games, only because I've always thought they just felt like incredibly frustrating trial and error simulators. But you can't really deny that they still had a seminal atmosphere and killer vibe, truly capturing the feeling of playing as this silent, bald assassin skulking around this seedy underworld and taking out all of these key figures. Contracts was unique for the series as well in the way that it was a sequel to the second game, as well as being something of a remake for the first, with Agent 47 critically wounded during the opening and then having flashbacks to all his old previous missions, which also explains why it's raining all the time with the rain in the real world seeping back over into his dreams. And right from the opening mission, the tone is dark and gritty, with the very first one even having a whole sequence where you find this kind of hideous murder shrine with the hacked up remains of a young woman. But it's one of the later missions set in a hotel, which is the one that I want to focus on.
Okay, lock my door.
Now this is actually a remake of a mission from the first game, where 47's sneaking into a hotel to take out a couple of terrorists. But if you know anything about these games, it's that the devil's in the details. Because heading off from the main lobby after you first make it into the building, you'll find a section of the hotel that's been locked up, with a message from the management even hung up on the door. If you decide to pick the lock when no one's looking and head on in, you'll soon notice the colour shifting, as everything seems to become more muted. And then if you're quick enough as you turn the next corner, you'll even catch a glimpse of a ghost down a nearby corridor, walking through the wall before quickly vanishing.
Fuck!
Now, a bit more investigation is going to reveal that this part of the hotel is an active crime scene, with a guest even being murdered in a nearby room and a grisly blood trail leading to a bathroom that appears to have been where most of this nasty stuff took place. At this point, if you look into any of the mirrors, you'll even see the ghost standing right behind you, glowing red eyes and all, waving its arms about as it beckons you to bugger off. Oh yeah, to make this even creepier, if you turn around to try to look at it, the thing of course is not even there. But weirdly, shooting at that same spot with a weapon is going to leave blood spatters on the wall behind it. Once you leave the area, the colours go back to normal and then life resumes as if it's never stopped, leaving this as an incredibly bizarre and chilling Easter egg that no doubt caught a lot of people off guard back then. And what I think makes this so good is just how out of left field it actually is. I mean, up until now, the whole game's been pretty straightforward. You know what I mean? Just hanging out at weird S&M sex parties and murdering people while they're in the middle of an opium high. But now the game's outright confirming the existence of ghosts and the paranormal within its universe. Which, if that's the case, also means that 47's probably got more people haunting him than Paulie did in The Sopranos.
How the fuck do you know that?
Either way, definitely a memorable and pretty damn creepy moment, responsible for the pissing of many pants back in 2004. Up next is another one from the early 2000s with Return to Castle Wolfenstein in 2001, a reboot for the series which loosely follows along the same plot as Wolfenstein 3D. And much like Wolfenstein 3D, the campaign opens with you, BJ Blazko, escaping from the dungeons and finding your way out of the eponymous castle. Working your way through the bowels of the place before reaching higher ground, and then gunning down every goose stepping moron that gets in your way. Soon you make it to the tram station and take that thing down into a nearby village, followed by cleaning house, quite literally, going from building to building along with shooting enemy soldiers in the streets. Eventually you meet up with the resistance members who tell you that the Nazis are performing some kind of an occult ritual at a nearby church, and the quickest way to reach them is by cutting through the nearby crypts and catacombs. Which is where shit gets real, because there's a whole bunch of zombies and undead warriors who are none too happy about the living being down there. With it also showing us very quickly how dangerous these things can be, as they attack and most likely kill a small squad of soldiers. Yeah, and you know what's bad? When they have you teaming up with the Nazis to kill these things. You'll also notice very quickly as well that the guys armed with shields can even deflect your bullets back at you if you try shooting them. Which was a really clever little gameplay curve thrown in to shift things up a bit, considering before this you could really get past everything by just shooting it in the face. It's also still really impressive just how absolutely relentless this chapter can be. I mean, you got zombies bursting out of their coffins, the floor falls out from beneath you multiple times, and at one point you're trapped in this room as a bunch of the undead pop out of the ground. It is pure nightmare fuel. One zombie type in particular is able to breathe fire for some reason, not to mention that it also has about 5 times the amount of health as the others. Then it gets to the point where it's like you're playing as Indiana Jones or something, having to avoid all these booby traps and activate a bunch of levers. Yeah, only the penitent men may pass. As well as, of course, collecting various bits of treasure for all that fortune and glory. All whilst you're being chased around by these reanimated figures and their glowing eyes. And to think as well that the most frightening thing is yet to come, that being taken on all those leather-clad elite guard in the next area. Yeah, still the cause of many confused boners back in the early 2000s.
Get ready!
It is also worth mentioning as well how the console ports for Return to Castle Wolfenstein on the PS2 and the Xbox had a similar sequence unique to those platforms, with the whole prologue chapters set inside a bunch of Egyptian tombs, which were equally unsettling. And in fact as well, the Xbox port also added in unique enemies to the crypts, with these occult priests that could shoot out lightning bolts. Either way though, regardless of how you experience it, this whole thing is a terrifying sequence, perfectly tapping back into the series' paranormal roots and really doing a great job of updating it into the at the time new engine with id Tech 3. Damn good stuff. Now, the Sonic the Hedgehog series is probably the last thing you'd ever associate with anything horror related, even though I'd argue that any section in a Sonic game where you're underwater probably qualifies, simply due to the panic-inducing music you had when you were starting to drown. But without a doubt, something that is absolutely worth mentioning is the Sandopolis zone in Sonic and Knuckles, particularly the second act. Now, what I really always thought was cool about this entry is how it was the first game where it felt like they tried to seamlessly transition things between each act and zone. I mean, compared to the previous games where once you beat an act, it would just fade to black and then load in the next area, in Sonic and Knuckles, the gameplay would just pick right up again from where you left off. At the end of each zone, there'd usually be like a short cutscene showing how Sonic found himself in the next area. But more importantly than that was the tone of the zone itself, which would often change dramatically as well. And it just really was one of the first times where a Sonic game made it feel like you were making a tangible journey through an actual game world. And the best example of this is, case in point, the Sandopolis zone. Right, so after having landed in the desert after getting out of that awesome flying battery zone, Sonic's now found himself in a scorching hot desert, pushing giant slabs around and abseiling down the side of buildings, with the Genesis even adding in these little subtle heat waves along the bottom of the screen to emphasize how hot the place is. The boss for this act is pretty cool too, being this giant leaping golem kind of thing that you need to bait into the nearby quicksand so that it can kill itself. Lol. Then after that, Sonic heads into the pyramid for the second act, where right away the music instantly sounds much more sinister. And then shortly into the act as well, you unwittingly release a bunch of ghosts, where from that point on, these things are going to be haunting you the entire time. From here on in, the lights are constantly dwindling, which causes the ghosts to get bigger and more menacing the darker it gets, to the point that they're outright hostile and are going to attack you. Taking them out with a spin jump is pretty much pointless because they'll just instantly respawn. So the only way to get rid of them is to turn the lights back on with all these various levers. But even then, that's only going to be temporary. Early on, you've got one of those infinite water slide puzzles to contend with, and you're constantly having to make it through all of these time-sensitive passageways. But the worst bit by far is where you've got to avoid this constantly rising sand that can easily trap you in if you're not quick enough and crush you to death, along with this constantly hostile bunch of ghost fuckers to contend with as well. And yeah, it might seem a bit tame by today's standards. In fact, you know what? Yeah, it's pretty tame. But I mean, try to get into the mind of a kid playing this for the first time. Considering that before this, you just played through something as innocent as the Mushroom Hill Zone, and then gone through that awesome airship in Flying Battery with its weirdly James Bond sounding backing track. Now you're trapped inside a pitch black pyramid with a bunch of spooky ghosts coming after you, and the very real threat of being crushed to death by these rising sand levels. Yeah, you get it now, don't ya, bitch? Still though, despite how scary this level might be, the scariest thing about the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, without a doubt, is some of its fan art and fan fiction. I mean, yeah, yikes.
What the fuck is that?
Now, when we're talking about the all-time best tactical shooters, you really can't look past SWAT 4. And although we'd had plenty of tactical shooters before this one came along, there was definitely something about the way this one handled its missions and environments, with the whole thing feeling much more atmospheric and tense. The reason for that is because this one was developed by Irrational Games, known for their work on System Shock 2, with a lot of that dev team even being comprised of people who used to work for Looking Glass Studios, with even Eric Brosius himself composing the soundtrack in this one.
Let's smooth.
Moving forward,
Drop your
trailer.
weapons and hit the floor.
Put your hands in the air.
Get down now.
Now, the missions in SWAT 4 aren't really connected in any kind of overarching way. It's really just a series of different scenarios in different locations, where you're given a whole bunch of tools and left to figure out the best way to defuse the situation.
It's open, sir.
But as you soon discover when playing, even something as simple as an arrest warrant can contain so much more. I'm referring to the game's second mission, the Fairfax residence, investigating the house of a suspect believed to be connected to a series of killings at a nearby college.
Suspect is wanted on multiple homicide and kidnapping charges.
Right from the get-go, the setup is just perfect. You're heading into this creepy house during the dead of night, and once you're inside, you almost instantly run into the suspect's creepy mother, who right away starts screaming out about her son's innocence.
You better leave my little boy alone.
You know, that is when she can get a breath in when she's not getting pepper sprayed in the face.
Lawrence wouldn't hurt a fly. Oh!
Deploy CS.
Oh, my eyes!
On a nearby radio, you'll hear a report from one of the victim's parents pleading for a daughter to be returned safely.
That was the mother of Melinda Klein, an apparent victim of the so-called law school lyncher.
And then in the basement, you see the first hints towards the suspect's cruelty, with all of these dead animals inside different tanks. But it's when you stumble upon the guy's room when it's all but confirmed that he's the killer, with the walls aligned with different newspaper articles serving as decorative trophies to his murderous accomplishments, along with a huge collection of VHS tapes on a nearby shelf, really showing that this guy's not only been up to this for a while now, but also taking a lot of sick pleasure in capturing the whole thing on film. In the next room is where it turns into some David Fincher type of shit, with all these cutout masks hanging from the ceiling like air fresheners, and this poor woman bound and gagged on a filthy mattress.
TOC, this is entry team. Entry team to TOC. We've got a wounded civilian.
Moving on deeper, you find a series of tunnels leading to the final room, which is a feces and bug-ridden hellhole in the ground where the final victim's being kept.
You're here.
And what's so cool about this game and this mission in particular is how SWAT 4's RNG can totally change the way it plays out each time. I mean, your goal is to simply arrest the mother and deal with the suspect however possible. But sometimes this guy might be hiding in the garage, or other times he's hiding in his room. Sometimes he gives up without any kind of fight, but then other times he's going to immediately open fire. Either way though, he's never really going to be in the same place twice. And a reminder as well that this is the second mission in the game.
Get down now!
Suspect compliant. Civilian ready for make and secure.
I would say as well that this is the scariest that it ever gets, only they manage to outdo themselves later on, with yet again another one that seems like it should be a routine mission. This time set inside a tenement building that's been taken over by this crazy doomsday cult, who've locked themselves away with all these guns and booby traps. Yeah, and if the real world has taught me anything, it's that religious zealots armed with powerful weaponry and fighting back against the cops doesn't usually end up in rainbows and lollipops.
Suspect inside. When do we tie them up?
And look, like I take a serial killer over a couple dozen armed cultists any day of the goddamn week. Because this is easily one of the tougher missions in the entire game, with lots of opportunities for things to go wrong. And again too, the more you get into it, the more the world building paints this horrific picture of what's actually going on here. And at some point you're bound to find your way into the kids' rooms, where you'll notice all of these ominously empty bunk beds and cribs.
Oh, shit. I thought I'd seen everything.
Eventually finding your way to the basement, where you'll realise what they've done and where the children are. Finding the floor lined with all of these tiny graves, including one they didn't even have time to properly bury.
TOC, we found a graveyard in the basement. Looks like it's their children.
Copy that. Entry team notifying the morgue.
Yeah, making it very clear that these fucking nutjobs were killing their own kids, in pursuit of this bizarre delusional religious vision they've all shared. Overall, like, these ones are less about something being paranormally frightening, and more about it showing the possibilities of pure evil that's inside human nature.
Oh god, get me out of here.
Yeah, and I thought that mirror effect was scary.
No!
Up next is another game you'd not really associate with horror due to its mostly comical and goofy premise, and that's with Timesplitters Future Perfect.
Yeah! Time to split!
I'll get the next one.
Now, Future Perfect is unique in that it really is the only game in the series to have an actual plot, outside of it just being this series of random missions in different time periods which didn't have any kind of connection.
Man, I could think of something else you need.
You're playing as Sergeant Cortez, chasing after a guy named Crow who's trying to rewrite history by changing key events throughout the timeline, where you eventually find yourself in 1994 at the so-called Mansion of Madness, teaming up with series babe JoBeth Casey, infamous for wearing that shirt.
Oh! Hey, you're no zombie!
God damn!
And although Mansions full of zombies wasn't really unique to the series by that point, this level definitely plays out a lot differently, feeling outright Resident Evil inspired, with a foyer featuring a giant staircase before you then go off and explore the mansion bit by bit. The weapons of choice are a shotgun, a very Colt Python looking revolver, and a flamethrower. And you'll eventually find your way beneath the mansion to a series of underground tunnels, before then coming across this secret lab where the zombie virus was first created. Yeah, sounds familiar. Even the way you interact with computers is very similar, and this short minecart sequence seems like it could have been inspired by the one in RE4. Though that one's maybe less likely considering both of these games were released months apart. The difference here though is that compared to every other mission where there was a whole fun and satirical tone, the mansion has moments where it really does feel like they're trying to genuinely scare the player. I mean, like, one area is just a series of different rooms with frightening and unsettling imagery, which serve no purpose outside that visual element.
We gotta get out of here.
There's a boss fight where a zombified deer hops out of a war trophy and starts attacking you, which I'm still not sure if it's supposed to be a reference to Evil Dead 2 or just supposed to be a Wendigo.
I'm gonna, need therapy after this.
Then in the kitchen, butchered carcasses come to life and start chasing after you. The ending is a fight against another humongous zombified deer-looking thing, before you've got to get out of the lab before it explodes, which, again, seems familiar. And if it wasn't for the constant presence of JoBeth Casey with that incredibly short skirt, well, this entire mission could have easily passed itself off as flat-out horror.
You go first.
Okay.
It's another one of those missions as well where it's as effective as it is because it comes out of nowhere. And consider that right before this you're on the back of a speeding train in broad daylight shooting at a bunch of henchmen and attack choppers.
I will have my revenge!
It does kind of remind me of that similar sequence in Timesplitters 2, during the opening mission in Siberia where you're infiltrating that dam, taking out security cameras and destroying filing cabinets only to then suddenly be in the middle of a zombie outbreak. And the Notre Dame mission after that was also kind of scary on purpose as well, with some great little visuals there to heighten that gothic mood and tone. This Mansion of Madness though is the absolute standout so far as horror is concerned, without a doubt.
Is she a ghost? For real?
But you want to know the scariest thing is that it's 2025 and we still don't have any kind of proper remaster or remake for this trilogy. I mean, that right there, folks, is absolutely terrifying.
I'll get the next one.
Which brings us on to the last game in the list, and that's Naughty Dog's Uncharted, the first entry in the series, Drake's Fortune. And look, despite how people might feel about the Uncharted franchise or Naughty Dog in general, it's hard to deny how solid that original trilogy was. Equal parts Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider, Drake's Fortune puts you into the wisecracking shoes of Nathan Drake.
Anti-aircraft fire? This is so not cool!
Stranded on a remote island with his gal pal that just happens to be inhabited by a small army of pirates, as they both search for the gold of El Dorado.
Wow. This looks promising.
And for the first few hours, things look pretty bright, literally, as you get into all these various gunfights with the pirates across the island, in between navigating past some pretty hairy platforming sections. Yeah, Naughty Dog and platforming on a tropical island, I mean, it's hard to not have flashbacks.
What have I got?
Towards the end of the game, though, as you find more and more clues to the gold and what's happened on the island, it starts to unearth a pretty dark backstory. where it turns out that even the Nazis tried their hand at finding this stuff back during the Second World War.
Sully, you're not gonna believe this.
And it's during this sequence where that horror aspect comes in, as you go from shooting pirates and mercenaries outside in the middle of the day, to suddenly being trapped inside a Nazi bunker and fighting zombies.
Oh shit.
Well, technically they're not zombies, they're actually called the Descendants, and they're supposed to be the remains of the colonists who originally stole El Dorado's gold and ended up getting cursed, making them look like what happens when someone ODs on Ozempic. And it's kinda similar to the tonal whiplash you get in the Indiana Jones films. You know, when they'd suddenly splice in this horrific sequence, like showing someone having their heart ripped out of their chest, or seeing someone's entire body melt in real time. It's also one of the biggest gameplay shifts as well, because prior to this, like almost every single combat sequence was about taking cover and sitting still. But now you're fighting these fast-moving little assholes who constantly force you to stay on the move and keep mobile. They did kind of rehash this concept in the other games as well. In Uncharted 2, for instance, towards the end, when you suddenly came up against the blue-skinned Guardians, who soaked up AK-47 bullets like it was a slap on the ass. And then in Uncharted 3, when Drake was hallucinating and thought he was getting attacked by the Djinn, who could teleport all over the place and again chew through bullets to the face like it was just a mild nuisance. As good as this sequence might be though, I still find it hard to forgive Naughty Dog for what they ultimately did. That being, killing off one of the greatest video game characters of all time. You know who I'm talking about? Yeah, Eddie Raja.
Hey, Drake.
Eddie Raja. I should have guessed.
I love that little guy.
Well, either way, that's about it for the video. If you can think of any other games that I might have missed that had cool little horror sequences, well, be sure to let me know in the comments. And if you'd like me to do any other similar videos, well, I'm all ears. So as always, thanks for watching.